Well, thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Scott Trindall, the chairman of the Waukesha County Democrats, for getting the message out, and so many of our fellow citizens from the Waukesha County area here. This is certainly in sharp contrast to the governor's signing ceremony, which, as he almost always does, will be in private by invitation only. That to get past the guards, I think you have to have credentialed media or have an invitation from the governor. Our doors are open here. Anybody can come in. Let me start by saying that's no coincidence, though, because Governor Walker is signing the state budget today in private because this budget is deeply damaging and incredibly unpopular here in Wisconsin. There are only two major beneficiaries in this budget: Governor Walker, who's positioning himself to be the most far right-wing candidate in the Republican presidential primary, and the special interest groups who have been bankrolling legislative Republicans, the governor's past campaigns, and his future presidential campaign. At a time of relative prosperity, when the nation is experiencing significant job growth, and many of our neighboring states are experiencing large surpluses that are enabling them to invest back into education, the people of Wisconsin are facing an extreme Republican slash-and-burn budget that reflects a crisis of the Republicans' making. Make no mistake, this budget is harmful for nearly all things that make Wisconsin great. In all, the budget contains more than 130 new policy items, almost all of which have never even been given a hearing. The budget sells out our children in K-12 public schools to allow for rampant statewide privatization of schools. Not only will schools get an effective cut in this state budget, but it will also siphon off between $600 and $800 million over the next decade and suck it from public schools to put into private, unaccountable voucher schools. This budget also guts our University of Wisconsin system with a $250 million cut. A $250 million cut, as well as destruction of tenured and shared governance that keeps our university strong and makes it an attractive place for star professors to come to the University of Wisconsin. We've already heard from Chancellor Blank that many are looking to potentially leave, which is so sad. The Republican budget does not invest what's needed in roads and bridges and infrastructure, and the changes Republican legislators will put in this budget will lead to the loss of over 5,500 well-paid construction jobs. Imagine that. At a time when we're 38th in the nation, this budget that was enrolled just a couple days ago will cost us 5,500 high-paid construction jobs just in that one industry alone. Furthermore, this budget went from being extremely bad to being even worse as it's made its way through the legislative process. And that is so damaging, so unfortunate. It will take us, when you look at the bottom line, from nearly a $500 million structural surplus under what the governor put forward to nearly a $500 million deficit. Now, I hope the governor does something about that with his vetoes. He could obviously take out the latest tax break for millionaires that was put in at the end of the budget process, as well as perhaps take some other creative steps. Unfortunately, though, we know the bottom line will not be good. Now, we know Republican legislators don't worry about a structural deficit because for them the solution is easy. You just cut programs like K-12, the UW, long-term care for seniors and the disabled, and they have no hesitancy in doing that. This budget really is much more of a right-wing primary election campaign document than it is a governing document, especially for a state like Wisconsin. The sad reality is Governor Walker is throwing the citizens of Wisconsin, their hopes, their dreams, their future under his campaign bus en route to Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and other points from there. So let me now turn it over to our fine assistant leader, Katrina Shanklin, who is going to talk more about some of the long-term care issues in particular and the effect on working people in the middle class. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Representative Barca. I'm here from Stevens Point, where I represent, because I think today is so important. The governor has an opportunity to veto a lot of things that currently would harm many people across the state, including the people who rely on long-term care programs. There are so many damaging and destructive parts of this budget, but one part that worries me the most is the drastic changes proposed to the long-term care programs that our most vulnerable really rely on. There's no reason to tinker with such a successful long-term care program. It's nationally known. In fact, it ranks 8th in the nation. But by doing so, Republicans are causing undue stress to people with disabilities and the elderly. It's also important to note that Gemini Cares already laid off 700 people, 92 from Stevens Point, because of these drastic long-term care changes in the budget. And I've heard from so many people across the state, many constituents, and people who have lied awake at night worrying about whether or not they would still have IRIS to preserve it as a separate Medicaid program. So I'm extremely concerned about these changes. So many people have asked me, where do these changes come from? And I said, you know, I think it makes much more sense as a campaign document to benefit insurance companies than it does as a document that helps the elderly and the people with disabilities. It's an extreme concern for all of ours. There's also a number of items in this budget that further corrode our workplace rights in the state. We've seen so many extreme attacks against workers who are the cornerstone of our state, and this budget furthers those attacks. I believe that workers deserve fair pay. These should have time to be with their families. They deserve the ability to have a voice in the workplace. Democrats believe the people of Wisconsin deserve a raise, and this budget will lower wages by changing references of living wage in our state laws to minimum wage. They'll also change our prevailing wage laws, which even Speaker Voss has admitted would cut and lead to lower wages. At the same time, though, this budget leads to tax breaks for just the super wealthy. And as a further blow to hardworking people, Republicans slipped in a last-minute provision that will jeopardize the weekend by eliminating the 7th day of rest for factory workers. Now, they might say it's optional, but we all know it's not. If we don't value workers, then we don't value families or communities. Equally as disturbing as this bad policy contained in the budget is the secretive process in which Republicans used to put it together. 67 policy items were added to the budget at the last possible minute, shutting the public out of the process completely. Some of those were state open records laws, which we saw tremendous backlash from both the media and the public. But Republicans have engaged in prolonged finger pointing on that note, and it's an unacceptable way to govern. We don't believe that that much policy should be thrown in at the last minute without a public hearing, without public scrutiny, and that's why Democrats have stood up not just to say this is wrong, but also to point to a solution. Assembly Democrats introduced a bill this week that would require both a public hearing and an executive session on any non-fiscal policy item thrown into the budget. Why? Because we believe the people of Wisconsin deserve a voice and deserve to have their legislators vote on any topic that eventually becomes law. That's the democratic process. We're proud to introduce it. We hope to see bipartisan support, but overall we're extremely disappointed in the fact that so much non-fiscal policy is put into the budget, policy that puts the health of people, the care of people at risk, like the long-term care policies I mentioned, and the worker policies I mentioned. We've been working together to fix and put an end to the secretive process, and I hope in the future we won't see a budget so harmful to communities. This budget makes far more sense as a campaign document than a fiscal document, and we need to do better. That's why Democrats introduced a solution. And now I'd like to introduce Assembly Democratic Vice Chair Jocasta Zamarripa to talk more about how this budget is harmful to communities like Milwaukee. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Shanklin. I'm State Representative Jocasta Zamarripa, and I want to thank you for being here today, especially the many people of Waukesha who have chosen to join us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon to express our grave concern over the governor's budget. Last week, Assembly Republicans claimed to care about allowing local communities to make their own decisions, but their actions demonstrate quite the opposite. This budget includes dozens of proposals to take control away from local communities and elected officials, and those takeaways have largely been aimed at Milwaukee. The most egregious is the so-called Opportunity for Schools and Partnership program, which creates a process for public school takeover in Milwaukee and other communities. This concerning proposal undermines democratically elected school boards and sets a dangerous precedent for future takeovers of districts across this great state. This seismic change was added in the middle of the night by the Joint Finance Committee without the appropriate review and scrutiny. The parents of our state and local communities should have the right to participate in decisions that affect our kids and our future. Instead of threats and takeovers, we should be focused on making sure our kids and schools have the resources they need to succeed and educate the future leaders of tomorrow. The takeover plan is one of the many things that my colleagues and I have called on Governor Walker to veto from this budget. Other egregious things in this budget include ending Chapter 220, which was a successful effort to integrate our public schools in Wisconsin. Taking the bucks out of the budget means it'll be much more difficult to pass that project, and the inability of Republicans to make decisions on transportation puts major road projects at risk. Ladies and gentlemen, this budget is bad for Milwaukee and for the great state of Wisconsin. Thank you.
I'll just conclude by saying that we believe the people of Wisconsin deserve better than this. We believe that the people of Wisconsin deserve a budget that reflects our values and our proud heritage as a state. That's why in the Assembly we put forward over 30 different amendments. Our Democratic brother in the Senate did something very similar. We had over 100 discrete ideas that could have made this budget far better for our children, their education, far better for jobs, far better for the bottom line, far better for our university system, far better for the middle class, far better for senior citizens, far better for people with disabilities, far better to strengthen our communities and protect our citizens. So we're very disappointed that the Republicans chose at every turn to turn down every single constructive alternative idea that Democrats brought forward. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have. So thank you for being here.
Have you heard anything from the governor's office yet about what is going to be vetoed?
No, we haven't. We've all sent letters, encouraging him to veto or support various elements of the budget, and we haven't heard anything yet. I would hope and expect that upon his signing the budget that he'll have it up on the website so that people of the state can immediately know what other steps have been taken to affect them in our future. Any other questions for any of us?
What's your reaction to him preparing for his presidential announcement tomorrow?
Well, obviously, the governor's been preparing for this. Some say his whole life, but clearly the last couple of years, all of his budgets, the bills that he's brought forward have all reflected the goal of trying to capture that far right wing of his party. He's positioned himself so that he can win over that far right wing element. The sad reality, though, he's brought his party and the state of Wisconsin to the far right in the process, whether it be this budget, whether it be his demanding a 20-week abortion bill without even exceptions for rape or incest, whether it be prevailing wage or all the other things that we know are so extreme for this state. From my standpoint, and the others can certainly answer as well, I think if ever in this country we needed somebody that could bring us together as a nation, he's exactly the wrong person. We know his whole goal is to be a divisive, polarizing leader. That's the way he's governed here in Wisconsin. We caught him on tape saying he wanted to divide and conquer. We believe we need someone that will unite and partner, not divide and conquer. So I don't believe he's in the mainstream of this country. Should he get the nomination, I think he's going to have a very bumpy ride because normally candidates move more to the center. He'd have a long way to go to get to the center.
How do you describe his involvement in this budget compared to, say, his first budget as governor? How often has he been at the Capitol? How often has he been discussing it with his leadership and with you guys?
Well, obviously, he's not been around much. As legislative leaders, typically we met with him every week during periods when we were in session. That no longer has happened. I will say, in fairness, he was there the last week, I think, when he realized how dire the circumstance had become. But again, I think it was to foster his own campaign and the need to get this done before he announces. But governors generally, of either party, historically get 80 to 90% of what they want. It certainly was true in this budget. In fact, the irony is that the Republican legislators, as it went through the process, actually made it worse.
Can you elaborate on your concerns for the UW system and the impacts there?
Well, as we've heard, I think Chancellor Blank has been probably the most articulate and outspoken during this process. And, of course, UW-Madison's our flagship campus. And, she's indicated that they're getting offer letters from all over the country at her campus. And she's very concerned. She's tried to reach out to them to assure them that the university still has the same commitment we always have. I've been on the board of the Foundation for the University of Wisconsin Parkside for well over a decade now. There's virtually no reserves whatsoever, so it's going to damage our ability there and in all the various cluster campuses. And certainly, maybe I don't know if you want to address from Stevens Point or EW Milwaukee as well, but it's a major concern.
From a workforce standpoint, I've spoken with a lot of employers sitting on the Workforce Development Committee, and they are concerned about the projected workforce shortage over the next decade. Employers are clamoring for a skilled workforce, so to gut the university system several times in several budgets, thanks to Governor Walker and his legislative Republicans, is to essentially set us up for a further workforce shortage. And when you cut the university system, you're actually creating bottlenecks in high-demand classes and high-demand fields like chemistry, biology, and medical degree access. So what you're really doing is you're prolonging the amount of time a student has to get to their degree and graduate. You're hindering employers' ability to hire skilled workers, and you're adding to the student loan debt crisis, which is not just in Wisconsin, but nationwide. We have over $1.3 trillion. You can imagine waiting an extra year for one or two courses you need to graduate. That's anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 more in tuition or student loan debt. So I'm gravely concerned about what these university system cuts will do to the student loan debt crisis here in Wisconsin. Democrats actually introduced a higher education package that would not only address the cuts to the university by funding the UW, but also adding to financial aid and ensuring that students who do have student loan debt can refinance their loans like a mortgage. And we were very concerned to see no Republicans would join us on it, but it's something we'll continue to address and to introduce to hopefully gain bipartisan support in the future. That's our goal, to help fix what we think is one of the largest crises in this state, not just a workforce shortage, but the student loan debt crisis.
Peter, next Monday, I believe, a week from Monday, we've got the WEDC board meeting. Is anything about this budget solved any of the problems at the WEDC?
No, sadly, there's virtually nothing in this budget that makes the WEDC any stronger or better prepared to address the needs of entrepreneurs or to turn around our disastrous record that we have in the state of being 38th in the nation in jobs and dead last in terms of wage growth. Now, again, we offered a whole package of amendments that would have had more accountability for when companies ship jobs overseas to be able to have effective clawback provisions. We came up with provisions that would have ensured that there's more accountability based on following all the ideas that came out of that very critical audit that came out from the Audit Bureau that they still haven't had a hearing on. We have provisions in there to require that they report fraud when you have people like BCI that fraudulently received a loan. And we just saw yesterday a report come out on Greenbox where this company continued to go to local authorities trying to get money. Had they reported this person immediately to authorities, we'd be so much further ahead. So we had a wide array. I think there were about 15 different discrete provisions that would have made WEDC far stronger. But unfortunately, the Republicans have not gone along with that. They wouldn't even go along when we brought forward a resolution to require that they turn over documents. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's almost like they're aiding them in hiding from the public where their hard-earned taxpayer dollars are going.
When the governor signs the budget, doesn't he effectively remove himself as chairman of the WEDC? Do you expect he will face the press, face the public, face yourself, Peter, at the WEDC board meeting on the 20th?
Well, it'll be interesting to find out. He does remove himself as the chairman of the board, but that doesn't escape his responsibility. He's the chief executive officer of the entire state of Wisconsin. So whether he's chairman of the board or he has one of his appointees be chairman of the board, the buck should stop with the governor. I know that oftentimes he doesn't like to accept that responsibility, but the bottom line is that he is responsible for what goes on under his administration in the executive branch of government.
Any comment on Voss and Knutson's doubling down proposal on the GAD?
Well, it's just a troubling pattern of trying to evade having clean, open, and transparent government in this state. It's clear they do not want a government watchdog. They want partisan lapdogs, similar to what they tried to do with the WRS with the retirement system. They wanted clearly to be able to ensure that you had partisan people deciding who would head the retirement system board. But, you know, clean and open government, on the last day of the session, we brought forward a resolution saying we did not want any degradation of our open records. The Republicans would not support that. They voted that down. Instead, they just said they're committed to open government. Well, quite a difference there. Any other questions?
What do you hear from your 11 Republican colleagues who also voted against this budget? Is there any common ground there?
Well, I don't know. That's what's sad. Not a word was spoken. They didn't try to convince their colleagues to vote no. They voted against virtually every single amendment that came forward. So, well, thank you all for being here. I'd be happy to answer any private questions afterwards.
Thank you for being here.